Hey everyone, welcome back to Not My Fantasy for our special holiday bonus episode for Dios de los Muertos. We are talking about the Book of Life, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm Cullen.
And I'm Hannah.
And this is our second episode recording, but our third one released. So if we're still a little rusty, that's why. And we have our first guest of the podcast, my coworker, Krizabeth. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
She's really going that extra mile to make me feel welcome on the team by coming on the podcast. So
No, really, I heard about this podcast and I was like, when am I going to be a guest?
Oh, amazing.
So yeah, we're here talking about 2014's The Book of Life. Now, Krizabeth, what is your relationship with kind of fantasy folklore as a genre?
To be honest, I don't really have much of a background.
So do you like not normally go to fantasy movies or anything? Or like, is it just, you just never watch them?
I mean, I guess it depends. Like fantasy in terms of like, are we talking like animation? Are we talking about like, the overall story? Because I think I've always enjoyed like animated films. I've enjoyed watching The Book of Life. And I also think because it has like a Latin or Mexican culture influence, it's something that I definitely want to support. So other than that, I love films like Rapunzel or even the story of Rapunzel. Cullen and I have something very in common in terms of like our favorite Disney movie is Sleeping Beauty. So that's kind of like the fantasy that I'm into and that I know.
Now, has anyone before this podcast, has anyone seen The Book of Life?
I remember seeing it in the theater in college. So I'm revisiting it.
You saw it I saw it on an airplane.
The best way to consume film.
Yeah, during we were stuck on the runway for like 3 hours.
Oh, trigger.
Where were you going?
We're leaving Ireland.
Okay.
And some people had stepped in a fairy ring and stepped on graves, and I think they really cursed us.
Oh, I was gonna say, were there just like sheep on the runway or something?
It was snow because it was like late February, so there was just a light snow, like snow that in Michigan we'd just be like whatever, but like Ireland actually doesn't get that much snow, so it was like a problem. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Had you seen the film before, Krizabeth?
So before this podcast, I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that movie before, and then I watched it and I was like, wait a minute, I have definitely seen this movie before. Yeah. So it was a good refresher. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah, it is on Disney Plus, if you're listening roughly around when this comes out. It was produced by Guillermo del Toro, directed by Jorge Gutierrez, and it's based on his original idea. It's an original property. It stars Diego Luna, Zoe Saldana, and Channing Tatum, famous Latino actor Channing Tatum.
I looked up the cast and I messaged Cullen immediately and I was like, why is Channing Tatum the lead?
Why is he one of the three main characters? Who knows?
I think it's because they needed like a celebrity that like white audiences would know.
And 2014 he was pretty popular.
Yeah, and I did look up to make sure, like, maybe he has some. And like, no, he is a.
Yeah, living in Tampa doesn't count. Sorry. Because if that is, then I have 3 years of Latino in me.
And that's something I wanted to point out in that, like, I'm married to a Mexican man, but I think I just want to preface that, like, I'm white, Hannah is white. A lot of my experience in fantasy and folklore is very like white European based. I do enjoy learning about other like myths and fairy tales from cultures that I didn't grow up learning about as much. So I do enjoy that. I actually really like holidays just as a concept. And I think most online discourse about them is really annoying because it always acts like there's some like conspiracy behind holidays when really like the melding and flow of culture is just kind of what makes them. It's like a very natural process because like humans across the globe have a lot of shared values, which is why people can relate to holidays that maybe they didn't grow up with initially. But yeah, so if we say things that are wrong, just let us know, like I'm not an expert in this lore. And some of these topics were hard to find. Some things were very easy to find a lot of research on, some things were not. So we are
And
not experts.
I would also share, sorry to cut you off, but I come from a Central American family. So a lot of what I know is from Central America. And so it's, as someone who grew up in LA, there's a lot of Mexican influence in our culture here in LA. So that's kind of what I know, but it's also still something that I'm learning about, a cultural practice that I'm learning about.
Yeah. So we're just being honest about where we're coming from. We are not, I honestly, in any of these topics, I'm not an expert. I do not have a degree in any of these things.
We just don't want to get canceled.
Don't cancel us. Constructive criticism allowed, though.
And insights, like if you have insights from it being your actual culture and you're like, hey, this is actually how it's like for us, like we want to hear these things. Because I mean, I love what you said in our first episode, Cullen, was that like we're kind of exploring the source material, whatever it may be, because these stories belong to the people. And so I think it's really important that you guys also share with us, your guys' experiences too.
Yeah, and I watched this with my husband. I think he fell asleep for part of it. He fell asleep whenever we watch a movie. But like he saw, like the bread. He's like, "Oh, that bread is so good." And the character is like, "This bread is delicious." He's like, "Yes, it is delicious." So let's kind of talk about the backstory. So this, so the Brothers Grimm was the first episode we did. It's a fictionalization of real people's lives, very heavily fictionalized. This is an original idea, but that doesn't mean it's not pulling from anything. And that doesn't mean we're saying this is like a plagiarism. We're just saying that like all stories, but especially in the fantasy, like folklore genre, are pulling from ideas that came from somewhere else. And that's fine. And I usually almost appreciate stories more when they are like kind of built on that foundation. Because there's a reason some of these like tropes and stories have lasted, because they mean something to people. So Dia de los Muertos is the Day of the Dead in Mexican culture, celebrated kind of November 1st, November 2nd. According to the 99-cent store, it is called Hola Halloween. You can find a lot of merch.
I've never seen that.
I love that.
So yes, my husband is very obsessed with Halloween decor, and like going to like 99-cent store, like he knows when like their fall collection, if you would call that, is released. So he's like, look, Hola Halloween. So it's become like our shorthand for anything that's like kind of like fake Mexican or like commercialized Mexican. Like, oh, that's very Hola Halloween. But also, that's how he refers to Day of the Dead now. Like, oh, it's Hola Halloween. Or he's like, next year, I'm going to decorate everything for Hola Halloween. It's like a colorful, joyful holiday full of music and dancing. And it is not exclusive to Mexico. Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, El Salvador, a lot of them have traditions around Day of the Dead. People will do vigils in cemeteries. They'll leave candles, marigolds. Are a big one. And they'll put their family's pictures on like ofrendas, which are like these kind of altars. They'll have their family on there, their family that has passed, and they'll leave offerings. So maybe something they really liked when they were alive, or just kind of, candles, flowers, sweets, the bread of the dead. And you see that in the movie. I got to see my husband's like aunts, like their ofrenda last year, and it was actually it was really cool. It was like they have this porch, and it was like this big thing on the porch, and it was muy authentico. Did you ever see that video? I think it's like invited my white friend over and had my Peruvian grandmother like make him food or something, and he's like, muy authentico, muy delicioso, and it like pans over to her, and she says in Spanish like, get him out of my house, he's ugly. She's just like, oh, he's ugly, get him out of my house. And then he's like, what did she say? And he's like, she said, thank you, and you're handsome. The tradition kind of says like November 1st, like the children who have passed away, the angelitos, will come visit. And on November 2nd, like the adults kind of join in, like the adults who passed away. It's kind of it's tradition that a lot of people associate with Halloween in Europe, of like the bridge between the living and the dead at this time of year, and the dead come to visit their loved ones. So it's much more positive than what's typically associated with like Halloween, with like the dead coming back to avenge. So a lot of cultures across the world have these kinds of traditions of honoring their ancestors. I feel like with modernization, they're dying out. So that's why I like that this holiday has such strength. And so I'm about to pronounce some things wrong. Okay. So the holiday began in Aztec culture. The festival of, I meant to look this up beforehand, Mictlantecuhtli. It's a festival of these gods, this goddess specifically. Her job was to watch the bones of the dead, and to be in charge of this festival. Like that was her job as a goddess. She also had a husband that she ruled over the dead with, which we might kind of see that kind of dynamic in this film. And then that ties into, with colonialism and the arrival of the Spanish. You have this time of year, the Catholic holidays of All Saints Day and All Souls Day, which are held on November 1st and November 2nd. So it was kind of like a triduum of like Halloween is like literally means the eve of All Saints Day. And November 1st is All Saints Day. I asked my mom to find pictures of me dressed up as St. Francis specifically, but we would dress up as saints at church. And like we have to do a little speech on our saint. And then All Souls Day was when.
Are you gonna edit your photo into this clip?
We might.
Oh yeah. We're definitely gonna post it to Instagram, but we'll definitely like.
Catholicism is wild. You guys do cosplay and stuff?
Yeah,
I guess I did cosplay too. I was like Mary before.
Yeah, it's children's cosplay. And like like sometimes you're telling the story of this is how I died violently, like. And there'd be weird drama. I remember my sister saying, like, with some of the girls, they would be like, "You're a virgin martyr? I converted my husband," and it'd be like, "What is the? Oh gosh!" Like I'm like,
can't wait to talk about the mythology of saints. Hopefully, there's some movies we could talk about.
Millions, that might be one. The movie is called Millions. There are not millions of movies about saints.
Wait, for Easter, did your church ever do like a reenactment of like Jesus and the cross? Okay, yeah, we did that too.
My brother was a Roman soldier, and I used that costume to be Perseus. My mom made me a Medusa head. For Halloween, I was Perseus. Because so we were rare in our community that we were allowed to do both Halloween and All Saints Day. Like some kids, they could not do Halloween. All Saints Day was all they got, but we could do both.
Yeah.
Because we're the liberal Catholic households.
I know that was the drama in that our neighbors were allowed to read Harry Potter and we weren't, but we were allowed to do Halloween and they weren't.
It's so interesting. I used to get in trouble as a kid because I would ask people like within a certain religions, like, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And I'd get in trouble after, like, stop asking these questions. They're controversial.
Gosh, Krizabeth, you can't just ask people why they're Christian. It's also Mean Girls Day.
But that's how kids are. Like they just like, why? Because I remember asking like, that makes no sense. Why? And it's just something about.
Ever hear about? There's this church that does like an Easter play, but they do it like pop culture. Yeah. And there's literally like the Avengers one.
There's Jenny Nicholson has a YouTube video where she ranks them all and synopsizes them all. But they're like 1 year is Toy Story.
Was Woody Jesus?
I think so, yeah.
Oh
Presumably.
my gosh, I have to find this video. Like, where do I watch this?
I'll send you
Yeah,
I'll send
because
you
I
the
haven't seen the
link.
ranking, but I've seen like clips of them. It's wild.
They're
I
also
mean, the production
musicals.
quality is great.
Yeah. They're musicals with like they're jukebox musicals.
Yeah, but changed to be Jesus.
So like
Oh my
imagine a Jesus themed Princess Bride pageant and they're singing Walking on Sunshine.
I mean,
So yeah, so and then the day after All Saints Day is All Souls Day. So if All Saints Day is about celebrating the people in heaven, All Souls Day is about celebrating people in purgatory. So we would go to like my like grandfather's grave and we'd like pray the rosary, you know. So that's kind of like that was the Catholic tradition, and that kind of morphed with, you know, the native indigenous Mexican traditions, and that kind of created this holiday that we have now, which is how holidays work. You know, an Adam ruins everything type is going to tell you that there's some conspiracy. I'm going to be honest, I don't think the Catholic Church got really good at conspiracies until the 1800s. But what do I know? I think they were a mess for most of everything. We need to talk about a little bit Santa Muerte. So La Muerte is a character in this film. So Santa Muerte is Holy Death. So that it's like a folk saint that's popular in Mexico. It is she's not like most saints are like people or angels. This is death essentially. And the Catholic Church has condemned the practice. Pope Francis, when he came to Mexico, complained about it. Because it is associated with drug cartels. Because so there's a temple in LA, and I was texting my old coworker Natalie, oh, maybe we should go. And she's like, that's like drug cartels. And like Natalie, if you know, is like a very free spirit. Like she has this Our Lady of Guadalupe / David Bowie tattoo on her arm. Like she's not the kind of person to be like squeamish, but she was like, oh no, I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, okay.
good to know.
Yeah, but Pope Francis also kicked me out of the Catholic Church for getting baptized wrong. So you know what? I don't know if we need to listen to everything he said.
How'd you get baptized wrong?
They used the wrong words. They said, we baptize you instead of I baptize you. And so in the year 2020, it has decided that I had never been Catholic my whole life.
Yeah. Wow. That's a story.
It's wild. Yeah, so the government kind of tears down a lot of Santa Muerte shrines, but some of them are pretty big and popular. And like she will like grant prayers based on like what color candle you leave. So like red candles are like, you know, symbols of love. So like, oh, like if you want like her to bring you together with somebody, you put like the red candle. And it's kind of like folk Catholicism, this blending of indigenous beliefs, especially with Christian imagery, is popular in a lot of colonized cultures. Like a lot of Haitian traditions, traditions in New Orleans, stuff that some people call voodoo, some people don't, you know, but that involves kind of like a mix of traditional African beliefs with Catholic beliefs, and people felt very comfortable participating in both. Yeah, so La Muerte's image also pulls from La Catrina's image. She originated as a political cartoon by Jose Guadalupe Posada, poking fun of like upper class women or women trying to appear upper class and white, like people wearing like white makeup to look more white, skeletons. Which, you know, Rafa is always showing me memes about whitesicans. But like there's so many layers between him translating the Spanish and like all the cultural context needed to get the meme. He'll show it to me and he's like laughing and I'm like, like I don't know what this means. But the name Katrina comes from Diego Rivera in the 1947 mural Sueño de una tarde dominical en la Alameda Central. Dream of Sunday afternoon along Central Alameda. So a big mural, and she was called Katrina, and that's kind of where the image comes from. And that's like this skeleton woman with like the big hat. And you'll see that around. And there she's often connected with Santa Muerte, and she talks of, and like she's a symbol of how death comes for us all, no matter our race or class. So that's kind of the background of that character. So Zabalba is another god figure in this movie. Zabalba is actually the name of the Mayan afterlife. It was ruled by there are like a bunch of different death gods and demons who cause suffering. It means place of fright.
Is this any relation to Xibalba from Road to El Dorado?
Yes.
Cool.
When they throw all the stuff down the water.
Yeah.
The text, yeah. So, and perhaps his role as kind of like this husband figure to La Morte refers to the married Aztec gods who ruled the dead. So next there's this character in this movie called the Candlemaker. And he's kind of separate from all this. So far we've been talking about like very like indigenous or at least like Mexican, Latin American lore. The Candlemaker, I mean, I couldn't really find anything about him outside of this movie. So he reminds me of, there's a Brothers Grimm story called Godfather Death, where this guy doesn't want God to be his kid's godfather, and because he has so many kids, he's asked everyone else in the world. And so God offers to be the youngest son's godfather. He says no, and then the devil, and he says no, and then death. He's like sure, and like eventually death is helping this kid, and the kid crosses death, and he takes him down to this like place where all the candles are. He's like, see, these are all their lives, and then he snuffs the candle out, and the guy dies. And so the Candlemaker has all these candles, and that's what it reminds me of. He could be playing the role of the god Saturn, which will make sense as we go along later. The title, The Book of Life, is interesting because I don't think the book is that central to this movie.
It's not.
Yeah, it's not.
And I, again, looking in lore, the closest thing I could find was like the Christian Book of Life, like where like the names of everyone in heaven, or even in Tolkien lore, there's this goddess figure Vari who weaves tapestries of the history of the world and puts them up. So different from the Fates, like she doesn't make destiny, she just like records it.
Yeah,
but the book has some free will stuff that we will get to.
And that's why we're gonna get to it. This movie is actually about predestination, and I will die on that
hill. And then so there's another lore element, is the two afterlife realms. So Aztec lore had a lot of different beliefs about the afterlife. In like, one place was for people who died in storms. There's people who died in combat or in childbirth went to one place. One was for children and one was for natural causes. So I'm not really sure, like the land of the remembered and the land of the forgotten. I don't know if that is a thing outside of this movie. Write in.
Let us know. What lore do you
Yeah,
know?
that's good to know, because I also was unsure if that was something that is that real? I don't know.
So that's interesting. So you're saying that like there's what you can find, there's not really a lore that points to this idea of like the land of the dead, the land of the remembered, and then the land of the forgotten, right?
Yeah, like the duality.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I just kind of was like, oh, that makes sense. I buy that.
Yeah, it fits very well. I think this movie kind of, what we're getting at is this movie kind of establishes its own lore, pulling from a lot of different sources, as opposed to like a movie that's just kind of retelling lore that's already well known,
And it's very successful at that. Like, again, like I bought into that dual worlds idea. I buy into that there's La Muerte, this god, and then Xibalba, the god, sort of they're married, that's in mythology all over the place. So yeah, like it's very solid. So kudos to this person for sure, for kind of cobbling together a bunch of really interesting stuff into a really cool lore.
Yeah, and so I think that kind of leads into, so there's lots of connections in this lore to other mythologies. So like the journeying to the underworld is a common trope. So like one of the earliest stories about it is the goddess Ishtar in Babylon does it to go after her lover Tammuz. And as she passes each layer of the underworld, she has to like remove an item of clothing, and then at the end she's naked and her sister and her demons get her because her sister rules the underworld. So the layers to the underworld, Dante plagiarized that. I'm just gonna say that. We're coming for the Dante estate. And then so you have like, there's Persephone and Hades. Hades kidnaps Persephone. They rule the underworld together in Greek mythology. There's a lot in Greek mythology, like Odysseus, Hercules, Aeneas. They all make journeys to the underworld. Psyche does it, to get back together with Cupid. She's like sent on a quest. And then Orpheus, this is telling, he goes after his lover Eurydice after she's bitten by a snake.
Oh,
Dies, and he goes after her. Orpheus, a famous musician.
Very telling. I mean, that's clearly an inspiration for this lore for a book of life.
Yeah.
Very cool.
In Norse mythology, the god Hermod does it on Odin's 8-legged horse that was born from Loki's Mpreg adventure, when Loki turned into a female horse and had sex with a horse and gave birth to an 8-legged horse.
Huh.
Yeah.
Can't wait to talk about that story eventually.
We have Izanagi, one of the original Japanese gods. He tried to get his wife Izanami back. They're the gods that made Japan. But when he found her in the underworld, she was like rotting. And then he ran away and she was embarrassed and sent demons after him. He escaped. But when he washed, that made the sun goddess Amaterasu, who the royal line is claims to be ascended from his left eye, and the moon god Tsukuyomi, and the storm god Susanoo. So he came from like the refuse from his nose. So these gods were born from him just washing stuff off from the underworld. And then another one is deities making deals about their favorite mortals. So Odin would do this all the time with his wife Frigg, and Frigg always outwitted him and won, which I support because Frigg is better than Odin. And then, kind of like how they choose their champions, like how in the movie La Morte becomes like an old woman and asks for help. That's a really, that's a super old trope. The goddess Hera does it with Jason and Jason the Argonauts. She pretends to be an old woman and needs help crossing a river. In the Bible, God does it with Sarah and Abraham. He shows up and asks them to feed him. And Mercury and Jupiter, they plagiarize that, and they do it with Bacchus and Philemon, this old couple, and they help them like die together because that's what they want. There's Christian stories about it with Jesus pretending to be a beggar. He asked Saint Christopher for help across the stream. You may know Saint Christopher from like different medals people will have on their cars. It's the patron saint of travelers. The Catholic Church also saying he's probably not real is another big claim to fame. St. Lawrence, cut his cloak in half for a beggar who turned out to be Jesus. Like he had a vision and it was Jesus. And this is also big in fairy tales. So Charles Perrault has a fairy tale called he's a famous French fairy tale writer. We will get to him very soon. He has one called The Fairies, or the Diamonds and the Toads, where like there's an old woman who needs help, and like the girl that's nice gets all this good stuff and she curses the girl that's mean. And that's kind of inspires like the Disney Beauty and the Beast origin story, where the old woman turns out to be a fairy or an enchantress who curses the beast for being unkind. It's also, the Brothers Grimm have like the Three Elves in the Woods and Frau Holly, which is all about like supernatural creatures like testing often young women. So we don't have time to get into that, in that all folk stories are in a category system called the Arne Thompson Uther. And they're all sorted by like types, and one is the kind and unkind girl, and it all involves like there's some test by a supernatural figure, and the kind girl gets good things and the unkind girl gets bad things. And so the deal with the gods involving a love triangle is also a very specific trope. The huntress Atalanta, who's like this famous female hero, she had this thing where she would do a race, like if people wanted to marry her, and if you lost in the race, she would murder you. And if she won, she would marry you. So a guy asked Venus for help, or Aphrodite, and he gave her golden apple, or she gave him golden apples, and he would throw the golden apples while he was running, and Atalanta would be like, "Oh my god, shiny," and go get it, and that's how he won. So that trope kind of evolves in not the Heath Ledger Knight's Tale, but the one in the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, 1392.
Wait, Heath Ledger's in A Knight's Tale too?
Yeah,
And
isn't he the
Brothers
main guy in
Grimm?
A Knight's Tale? Yeah.
I think
my
so, yeah.
gosh. He does a lot. He did a lot of period pieces.
So the Canterbury Tale, that's the Knight's Tale, and it involves these two characters, Archite, who's basically Joaquin in this movie, and Palamon, who's Manolo, and they're fighting over Emily or Amelia, and it's decided that like whoever wins her will win in this duel. Shakespeare adapted it with this other guy who I have never heard of before into a play called Two Noble Kinsmen. I remember pretentiously carrying around the complete works of Shakespeare when I was like 12 and reading this while wearing socks and sandals. So I was a real winner. But it's a trope. The tale has been told a couple times in British literature, but in the story, Emily prays to Diana, who's the kind of the goddess of like young women and virginity, and she says either like I want to marry for love or I want to be single. And then Palamon prays to Venus, goddess of love and beauty, because he's like, oh, love is what like I want to marry this girl. I'm in love with her, so I need to ask for the help of the goddess of love. And Archite prays to Mars, god of war, Venus's longtime on again, off again lover, for help. And so in the end, all their prayers are granted because Archite wins the combat. And then I don't know what Diana was doing, but apparently somehow Saturn, who's the god of agriculture and people who do poorly researched conspiracies about Christmas, he just gets involved suddenly. But he causes Archite to die by accident. So that means Mars was right, Archite won, but Venus won because the other guy died. So he got to Palamon was united with his love, and Diana was right because Emily gets to marry someone who loves her. So like one of those things where all the prayers come true. And so my point in this is you always side with Venus in this stuff. Love always wins. Her only significant loss was the Trojan War. And she did lose to Cupid once in the Cupid and Psyche story, but that's her son. He's also the god of love. But yes, she lost the Trojan War, but her son escaped and found Rome. And now you have Catholic rad trads on Instagram insisting that Latin is the best language. And I assume that must be because God has a thing for the descendants of Venus. I don't know what else they could be referring to, honestly, though. Like, why else is Latin special? So, side with Venus, long term. She's playing the long game. So let's get into the movie. So that's all the lore that's backing up this movie. And so when we did Brothers Grimm, I had like a paragraph synopsis because most of that movie was just nonsense. It was just like shouting around in trees. This has there's a lot going on in this movie.
So many layers. It's like an onion.
Like Shrek, the text.
Which we will also talk about eventually.
Oh my gosh, I love that movie. Bring me on for that one too.
All right, you're booked.
So we get Christina Applegate as a museum docent. And she is going to show these kids, they're the detention kids. She's going to show them this really cool exhibit about Mexico. And she tells the story with the puppets. She explains the lore. She tells the story. The kids interrupt throughout the movie. I don't think it really adds anything. Except one time the little girl was really sad. She's like, it can't end like this. And I was like, oh, I'm with you.
Are we sure they're actually the detention kids? Because like that little girl seems very harmless. In fact, most of those kids seem harmless. And I think the only reason like they're supposed to be bad is because they start throwing spitballs at her. But I think it's just like the one kid. It's like, that's the detention kid. But like everyone else seems fine.
What do you think of the framing device, Krizabeth?
I mean, I think as far as like the kids go, I think they added like some break in the story. And I don't know, the little sweet girl when she was like, yeah, I can't end like this. I was like, oh my God, it really can't. Because there was a point where I was like, that can't be it. I don't know if you'll get to it, but yeah, then I was like, okay. And I think the kids also contribute to like the overall story at the end. when they're like, all right, and I think it's all of us kind of learning about the book of life or Dia de los Muertos.
For me, the framing device is, I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but like also thinking about the fact that this is like completely new lore. I guess like, because now like we've gotten into it, like, okay, I can kind of understand like why the writer would feel like this is necessary, because jumping right into the story may actually be more confusing with all of the layers, because it's not stuff that we would know about, anyone would know about. It's not, it's drawing on inspiration, but it's not like the key foundation.
And even then, like, it's pulling from so much, but you said, oh, the Knight's Tale from Canterbury Tales, like I can look up, I'm like, oh, I can vaguely remember that story, but you can't, if you ask me on the street, like, what was the Knight's Tale in the Canterbury Tales, I'm not gonna know that off the top of my head. And like,
yeah, but I also think that in some ways, for me, like the interruptions of story, I didn't like, because it took me out of the story, because I kind of just wanted to stay there. So yeah, now I'm kind of like back and forth with it, because like I see where it could be necessary, but I'm also like, maybe less of these children.
I think it'll be interesting to track throughout the podcast how many movies do a framing device, because I think it's especially common in fantasy.
Yeah.
For
sure.
So we shall see.
The Hobbit framing device. We're actually getting Bilbo's journal.
Oh yeah.
Framing
his
device.
Recipe blog, yeah.
But his recipe blog. But he doesn't interrupt the story. So I don't know what to do with that. But anyway.
Okay, so Christina Applegate, she takes us to this world.
She kidnaps those children.
She kidnaps those children.
Because they're expected at this museum, I think. Like the bus just drops them off and they go behind a wall. So
but they think it's cool, and she shows them like the wooden figures, and she talks about how Mexico is at the center of the universe. At the center of Mexico is this town, San Angel, and there's a holy angel, and that is like like the center of the world, that's right above the land of the remembered, where people who are remembered and beloved by the people on earth go, and the land of the forgotten, where people who know and remembers are. And then she introduced us to the town. She like the best friends. So we have Manolo and Joaquin, they're best friends. They love the same girl, Maria. And Zabalba is bored, sad, lonely in the land of the forgotten. Too bad for him, I guess. And he makes a wager with La Muerte, who's mad at him because he cheated. And like they're referring to a wager, but it sounds like something else.
That's a little more personal.
I did too. I was like, and then they're like talking like, "Oh, it was a wager." I was like, "Wait, what? I thought you were talking about your marriage." Okay.
Long distance relationships are hard. Yeah, and they make a wager where like whoever marries Maria, whichever boy they favor will, like, if their person,
they swap places, essentially.
Yeah, wife swap. La Muerte picks Manolo because he's the sensitive one. He likes music, he's more kind-hearted, and she appears as an old woman, like in a lot of those fairy tales and myths, and is like, hey, can I have some bread? And he's like, yeah, like my mom would have rather like you had the bread, like she'd rather we share it than we just keep it on her altar. Because we meet his father and we learn that his mother Carmen passed. And then Zabalba goes to Joaquin, whose father was this famous like hero in the town, and he has all this bread at the altar, and he like kind of asks for it, and Joaquin's like, no, this bread is delicious and it's not yours. And I guess that's what Zabalba wanted, because he's like, okay, here's the medal of everlasting life. He doesn't call it that, but we find out
it's like it's gonna give you confidence or something like that, something very vague. And I'm like, you're a cheater. Your wife should leave you for good.
And it makes him it makes Joaquin essentially immune, like he can't die. We find that out later, but
he doesn't know.
He doesn't know
he
that.
Just thinks he's amazing.
Yeah, he just thinks he's Channing Tatum. So Maria, after kind of causing a scene, like freeing these adorable pigs from the butcher, and Joaquin's
Also,
guitar gets broken,
it
or
makes me
Manolo's, yeah.
wonder, like, she's lived in this town her entire life. She's like 9, right? This just suddenly came to her, like, oh, that's where bacon comes from.
I mean,
And I mean, that's how you learn as a kid, but like, it just, she would pass it so many times, and now is the chance to free those pigs.
It was that one pig that she saw though.
Right,
That
maybe that's
cute
what it
little
was. It
pig.
was Chewy.
he was cute though. I was
Mhm.
He
like,
was cute.
and I like that he grew up. He wasn't like a mini pig. Like he was just
He
chilling. They were
grew up
still
and
besties.
he like screams. I don't like that. He sounds like a really loud squeal, and he talks kind of. It's weird.
But Maria is sent to Spain to become a proper lady, to the Sisters of like Perpetual Purity.
Virginity,
Yeah,
yeah.
something like that. Rafa was like, what is that? And I'm like, they made it up.
It's a joke about Catholic things, I guess. I think Glee did something very similar.
every movie when they can will do it.
Yeah, because
it's a classic.
Gotta make fun of the Catholics.
We deserve it.
You said that.
I'm gonna get canceled by Pope Francis.
You were already canceled.
The pig stampede broke Manolo's guitar. So when they're leaving, she gives him a guitar, and it says always play from the heart. And she's like, never stop playing. And he gave her Chewy. And Joaquin is like, I didn't know we were bringing gifts.
He's the worst. He's literally the worst as a 9-year-old. Like, I don't even feel bad.
With his fake mustache.
Oh yeah, his fake mustache. I do love how important mustaches were for him. I was almost expecting his adult mustache to be fake.
Oh, interesting.
Which, I just watched The Willoughbys on Netflix. And mustaches, a young boy desiring a mustache is also a theme in that animated film.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was one of the themes that I caught was a young boy wanting to be a man, and like trying to appear so with their mustache and other like attributes, like being strong or whatever.
This movie does have a lot to say about like masculinity.
Oh yeah, especially with Manolo's story and like the pressures of his parent or his dad.
And I think I want to kind of talk about that a little more, especially when we talk about, I don't think it's fair, but everyone is going to compare this movie to Coco. This movie came first. It's a holiday, can have a bajillion movies about it, as we know with Halloween and Christmas. But of course, people are always going to compare these movies. So we will have to talk a little bit about comparing them. And I think
extensively. There are so, like, put aside just the fact that like they're both about Dia de los Muertos, and they both have the protagonist who's a musician. Or what the bell thing, the antagonist dying by a bell, it killed me. Not literally. That was a bad joke. I literally was just like, excuse me, Coco? What are you doing? What did you do? Did you steal from this movie? So a lot of strange little parallels like that too.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting how these two different kind of studios portray the same culture, especially in relation to masculinity. And so we'll get there. So she goes to Europe, and this is suddenly a jukebox musical.
Does she give Joaquin a gift?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay.
She always had a favorite.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, what? Get out of here. Like, you're just a third wheel. Go away. And so, like, that's what makes me wonder, like, what is Zabalba doing? He's not gonna win. Like,
that's why
he cheats. And so I'm just like, man, like she should have seen that. Come on. Anyway. That was like a Maury episode. Can't you see? He cheated before.
And so it's a jukebox musical. They're singing Mumford Sons, I Will Wait for You.
Oh God. That was a wake-up call.
So here's the thing about the jukebox musicalness. I actually really like some of the original songs. And I think this movie would have been a great original musical. And I think there's jukebox musicals that are way bigger offenders of this. Looking at you, Camila Cabello, Cinderella, where like the songs are just kind of like it doesn't feel organic. And this at least like very much rearranged the songs musically to fit the world. But still, I'm like, you could have written an original song.
Yeah, they had two originals.
Yeah.
I would have, I'm like, why don't you just spend the money to like get a great songwriter and write original music?
Because like a Disney movie only has like 5 songs. It's not like a full Broadway musical.
And then once it becomes a Broadway musical, they write more songs for it then.
And then they make a live action without using any of the songs in the Broadway one, and they write more songs.
Yeah. That makes sense. So I mean, once like that happened and then there's another song later, I was like, I did not realize this was basically Glee, but set in an animated wood figure version of Mexico. I was like, I was not expecting this. I did not remember that from when I saw it. So
I remembered I Will Wait for You because I remember being like, wait, when I first saw the movie. And Rafa was like, wait, I know this song. I know.
Yeah.
So Manolo is a Sanchez, and they were bullfighters. So his father, what's his father's name again? I wrote it down.
I think Carlos.
Yeah, I think it is Carlos.
For whatever reason, his mom's name like stuck in my brain, but his dad's.
Yeah, I want to say it's Carlos because it's Hector Alonzado who plays him.
It's Carlos Sanchez.
Yeah. So he is like, we're all bullfighters, and you're gonna be a bullfighter, and you're good at it. You have a natural gift.
Was his mom was Carmen also a bullfighter?
No.
Is that how she died? But Grandma was a bullfighter.
Grandma was a bullfighter. Yeah.
Love Grandma.
Grandma, who later on she appears in the Land of the Dead. And I'm like, did she get attacked by the bandits? And she's like, oh, cholesterol.
That got me.
Yeah, there was so much happening during that sequence that like all of a sudden there were like 3 people and like new people in the Land of the Remembered. I was like, how did you get here? I don't remember seeing that like 2 seconds ago.
So he's like, you need to be a bullfighter, and he says the line that's important: Sanchez men don't apologize. And Grandma's like, never. It's like sounds like she's being supportive, but she's also like, and I hate it.
Yeah.
And then so Joaquin meanwhile becomes like the town hero. He joins like the guard under General Posada, who's Maria's father. And though Rafa was like, Posada, this is a Los Muertos movie. But anyway, so yeah, he's with the like very hideous looking soldiers. The soldiers and the mariachi people are a little disturbing.
I mean, we'll talk about that when we get to design, but I mean,
So Maria's back in town on the day of Manolo's big bullfight, and she comes in, and okay, this is a nitpick, she like is there, and all the girls, like there are these like village girls who are very much like those village girls in Beauty and the Beast because they're like in love with Joaquin. And then they're like, she's so natural, and I'm like, what?
What does that mean?
Like they were all beautiful. It's like, because you have a flower in your hair. A flower's natural.
I don't understand that. She doesn't really talk for like that whole first segment of like when we see her until like the
she has the fan, she's she knows how to make an entrance. She's voguing.
She does. There some people, like you hear people talking when she walks by. Everyone was waiting to see how Maria had grown, is what Christina Applegate's line was. Creepy. And then so as she's walking by, they're like, oh, like the jewel of the town. I was like, she was like 9 when she got shipped off. Like, please stop. Let's stop.
Maybe it's because her dad is like essentially in charge.
Yeah, but
maybe
the jewel thing, it's
yeah. Also, I wonder why he's called general when he's essentially the mayor.
Yeah. That's too political, Cullen.
I'm like, this is a nitpick. It doesn't really matter. But I'm like, wait, he's the mayor. Because they're in like a big box, like watching the bullfight. And she's and Joaquin is there. And he's like trying to impress her, and she's friendly with him, you know. And then so it's also apparently it's time to pick a husband. Everyone's like, Maria's back, she's getting married. So Manolo is fighting the bull, and he's never killed the bull before. That's something they say. And he sees Maria watching, like she obviously has a soft spot for animals, and like doesn't want him to kill it. And so he says he won't kill the bull. And everyone's booing him, but she's like, yeah, way to go. And then his family basically like disowns him. But then he's later talking to them, and I was like, I thought they disowned him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very.
Yeah,
it's very like wishy-washy.
Which is, I could see like those characters. I could see being like, oh, you're disowned, and then like, why weren't you at dinner?
Like,
yeah.
I could see them. And then so then he sings "I'm a Creep."
It's not a good choice for this movie.
I think there's just so many other songs that could have conveyed like that outcast feeling.
Yes.
Maybe James Blunt's "You're Beautiful." I don't know. That's the first one that came into my head. But I'm like, because he's not really a creep. He's like, Manolo's like very normal. Like,
yeah, that song it's like depressing.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It feels like it was such a weird choice because also this is a children's movie. It's just a weird choice. That's all I can say about it.
But
she's super into it. She's like, I love Radiohead or whoever this is. I think it's Radiohead.
Yeah, if my notes say Maria is into it. She's into it.
Yeah,
and then
she loves Radiohead. She found them in Spain.
That's the culture in Europe. Because she's at this dinner and she's talking about like, oh, I love the culture in Europe, whatever. And the dad is like trying to basically push her and Joaquin together. Joaquin is trying to be like more casual about it. Like he's interested, but he's obviously not like super on it. But then she's like, oh yeah, you really want to be with me. Like you really just want someone to like cook and like clean for you and take care of you.
And he grows under the table. It's really weird.
He's like,
not literally, we don't see that obviously, but like he literally is just like, yeah, that's what I want. Oh, and like gross. It works.
Yeah.
And then she's in her Princess Jasmine era. She's like, that's what you think women are for.
Third wave feminism, girl power feminism.
She's like, women are for so much more than that. Like, you're disgusting, you know? And she's like, I'm gonna go hang out with my pig, Chewy. I need some civilized company.
Which was a great line. That's a great line.
And so she storms up. Meanwhile, Joaquin is walking around with the mariachi guys who they've been drinking. It's been
Manolo, yeah.
Oh, Manolo, yeah. And then they're like, you have to do something to like show how you care. And they start singing like all these pop songs it's very okay. And then he looks at his guitar because he's like, none of those will work, because she starts the pig, it just throws like giant plants at them to get them to shut up. And he's like, I should play from the heart. And he sings one of the original songs, I Love You Too Much. I actually really like this song. I've been listening to it like all week. I think it's really sweet, and it like manages to be like very simple in like its lyrics, and it sounds like, almost like he could have just made it up in that moment. Right. And he's like this scene also makes me think of Aladdin, because like his friends all stack up and he like gets on top like the carpet and he leans down and they're about to kiss, and she stops. She puts her finger on his lips and is like, oh, did you think it would be that easy? And he all falls, and he's kind of like, yes. But she's charmed by it. You know, she liked it. And everyone in the town was kind of watching it, and it was this kind of beautiful moment. And so Joaquin sees it, and he's like, gotta lock this down. So she runs downstairs to see Manolo, and then he's there with the ring, like, I'm proposing. And she's like, and the dad's basically like, you need him to stay around and protect the town.
So did he explicitly say that, like, if I don't get to marry your daughter, I'm peacing out? Or is this like, because also there's like these banditos that are like gonna attack the town. That's another layer to the story.
Yeah, what is did you find anything on like the chacal?
No, I didn't really look into Chacal.
Because that's another interesting layer too that was
Yeah.
sprinkled in there.
There is so much lore in this movie. Which I think it is to its benefit. I think it feels like a very rich world. But there is also a lot going on. Okay, so this is Joaquin's hometown, right? Like, his dad was a hero here. These are his people. He spent more time here than Maria has.
Yeah. Why does he need Maria's marriage and affection to want to stay around? Because wouldn't you think the glory of living up to his father's name, wouldn't that be enough to keep him around?
Or
and
like
to like take care of the people that were in town that like helped raise him?
Like, yeah, does he just want everyone he knows to die? Like, is that fine? He's like, if I don't get to fuck with Maria, like, you all die, and like,
He's the worst.
like, that's the thing. And he's like, doesn't like to phrase it that way, but he doesn't deny that without marrying her, he would leave. And so like Manolo and Joaquin are like fighting over her, and she's all like, y'all are acting like children. I studied fencing, like, I'm not a prize to be won, Jasmine. But just like, she's like, hey, like, you're being idiots, like, stop. And then they're like, what about the proposal? And she doesn't want to accept right away. And so Joaquin storms off, and then they're like, the bandits are here. And Manolo's gonna fight them, but then Joaquin flies in and is all like, he beats them up. But they do see that he has the medal, and they're like, oh, the medal.
Mm-hmm.
And then so then
because at dinner Maria like goes to point out, and he jumps up and screams. He's like, ah, don't touch it. This is very special.
And then he Joaquin walks Maria home, and he's bragging about like all his medals, and he like asks her nothing about himself, and he's like, I got her a gift, and she's like, oh, that's so sweet. And then like, it's a picture of himself.
It's a signed picture, an autographed like studio shot. Because like when we go into that scene, he's literally finishing up, and this is the medal for having the most medals.
It's mentioning that scene in Beauty and the Beast where Gaston's like, do you want to go to the tavern and look at all my trophies? And she's like, that sounds fun, but no, like, and Maria is trying a lot harder than Belle was in that situation. Like, Maria is like trying to like find, like, she grew up with him, like, she has some affection for him, but she's like, you like don't care about anyone other than yourself.
He's the worst, like you've been saying.
And like, that's why it's like, I don't think the audience is even supposed to want her to be with Joaquin, because like, she seems really uncomfortable around him, and it's just like, ugh.
Yeah, I think we are supposed to be on Manolo's side.
But I mean, it's so easy because obviously he's the sensitive one, and
he's the protagonist.
Isn't it interesting too how they make the sensitive one this like sensitive musician, but then like the tough guy is like this guy who just wants approval by like the general of their town. It's just interesting how they put them into these categories.
Mm-hmm.
It is very again, it's pulling from all these myths and legends, so it's very traditional. It's a very traditional role. I mean, the Maria character has a much stronger personality than like the Emily's ever did in like the Chaucer or Shakespeare. I think the characters are really well defined. Honestly, I think this might be the best version of that story. But yeah, it is interesting how it's very traditional. There's not a lot of subverting going on when it comes to the boys. Manolo tells Maria to meet him outside of town at dawn. And she gets there, and there are all these candles, and he's singing Elvis's Can't Help Falling in Love, which is one of my favorite like romantic songs. And so there's like this big tree, and he's singing there, and he like it's like he's proposing, but he's like, I don't have a ring or anything. The only thing I can offer you is my love. And she's into it, you know.
Yeah.
But Zabalba sent his little snake staff, and another Aladdin Jafar thing, Jafar, yeah. And it's coming for Manolo, or it looks like it is. So Maria's like pushes him away, and then the snake bites her.
Yeah, it has a Frozen moment. Pushes.
Oh yeah.
Another, obviously pulling from that lore, clearly pulling from Frozen, that it came out
a year
later,
a year before this. Yeah.
Oh, was it before?
Frozen is 2013. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, he wrote this movie fast, clearly.
Yeah. And so she like collapses. You know, I was like, oh, this is Orpheus and Eurydice, because she collapses, and he's all like, I should have protected you. And everyone's like, why didn't you protect her? Like, this is your fault.
And it's like, there was a snake. Like, come on.
But it's very, you know, leaning to that kind of masculinity, and
that's
like
true.
the protector, and he won't kill the bull. Like, he's not adequate to protect her.
He's not the protector.
Yeah. So they bring her away, and he blames himself. And Zabalba basically shows up and is like, I'll like take you to her, like, if you want, you know, like, because he's like, I don't deserve to be alive. It should have been me. It's kind of dark. He wants to be with her. And so the snake turns out to have two heads, and it bites him twice, and he dies immediately.
It's like Romeo and Juliet. If he had just like gone and checked on her instead of going with this guy,
yeah,
they would have worked it out.
Yeah, so he's back in the land of the remembered. Okay, meanwhile, Chakal, there's just so much going on in this movie. Chakal is like, he's trying to get the medal back because he had the medal that he stole from Zabalba, and Zabalba got it back, and Zabalba was like, I got this back. I'm giving it to a 9-year-old. Yeah.
Wait, how old are they? Like, what is the time span between like when they're super young to adults? Because also Joaquin, I can't imagine him having that medal for X amount of years and people not knowing that he had it.
Right. So
yeah, are they supposed to be like 20?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like maybe 10 years has passed. Yeah, it is really kind of strange. Like, someone would have pointed that out before, but I guess, like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's deliberately vague.
Yeah.
Which I think these kind of movies are better when they're like deliberately vague, because then you don't have to like define how old these characters are when they're getting married. Kids can just kind of fill it in.
Right.
With whatever age they think is when people get, you know, like that's just how you think as a kid. You're like, oh, they're at the age people get married at age.
They're 70.
Yeah, you know, like
that's how old you have to be.
I'm 16. I'm a grandmother. So in the land of the remembered, he's there. It's this big festival because it's the Day of the Dead. He's reunited with his family, his ancestors, including a big dumb one, a singing pirate.
Are they all like on their own like family ship?
They all have their own float.
So,
yeah.
Right. Okay. Because I was wondering. I was like, it feels isolated from everything else, because it kind of felt like, oh, it's just like one area, and I thought they were on like a ship, like in the sea or something.
No, it's like one of the floats is shaped like a ship.
Okay.
But it's like a parade, and they're like each have their own kind of float.
Okay.
Because he sees his grandfather Luis, who's like, you're a disgrace. And then
but also I love you. Welcome.
Welcome. And then he sees his mother Carmen. Actually, Rafa in this scene was like, oh, like,
it was actually really sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, like he sees his mother. That was the first scene I really like felt like a kind of emotional in. It was just like this sweet reunion. And she's like, I've been waiting so long for you. But she's like, but not long enough. Like, why are you here? And he's like, I became a bullfighter like you always wanted. And she's like, I didn't want that. And she's like, you guys are all dumb and die too soon. And so she's very happy to see him, and she introduced him to his cousins, including there's a clown and there's 2 revolution fighter girls.
Okay, really quick. I mean, I know that we're going to talk about character design, but I cannot wait. Are you guys familiar with Animal Crossing characters at all? because the clown literally looks like a new character that they introduced. Hold on, let me put this in the chat.
Put it in the chat.
Putting it in the chat. He literally looks like Pietro from Animal Crossing. I was crying.
Oh my god.
They took it from this movie.
Yeah, so just I had to throw that out there.
And so they're like, oh, Lamorte will help you. She loves helping people, because the big thing about Lamorte is she believes in the goodness of humanity. And so they go to her palace, but then Zabalba is there because he won the wager.
Yeah.
And Manolo's like, well, what? And he's like, Maria's dead. And he's like, no, she was only bit by one snake. So then Joaquin like kisses her.
True love's kiss. That's sort of how they play it off.
Was it the kiss, or was it that the metal touched her?
It was definitely the metal touched her, but they think it was the kiss. The dad's like, oh my god, there's that trope too.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, it's definitely that metal goes ding, and she goes,
yeah,
she's alive.
And so they're like, oh my gosh, you're alive. And the dad's like, you need to marry Joaquin. He can protect you. And Joaquin's kind of like, oh, okay. We
not just protect you, he can bring you back from the dead. Like, that's really what he should have said. You're never going to die. You're never going to escape him. Is that great?
And she's kind of like, he's like, you got to do it to protect our town. She is the property, like.
I mean, she probably feels like a debt because like, I mean, we don't really get into like her mind and feelings a lot because, she's not the protagonist and she's a woman. Why do we care? But like, she probably feels indebted to him that like, regardless of how it specifically happened, like he saved her, know? She's like, okay, well, it's my duty. So
she accepts the proposal. But Manolo's like, well, then you cheated, you lied. And you cheated, so I'm gonna tell Lamorte.
He's like, no, don't do that.
And he's like, but you won't find her, and he's like, and soon the bandits are gonna come and they're gonna burn down your town, and soon no one will remember any of you, and you'll all go to the land of forgotten. Yeah, I was like, that's insane.
I mean, we'll talk about world building, but like we only get very brief glimpses at this point in the movie, and they're just kind of like people who are just like kind of like zombies, and then they just poof into dust. Like, it's terrifying.
So so Carmen, Luis, and Manolo go to the Cave of Souls, which is how you get to In Between the Worlds. And it's like this maze labyrinth thing with these rocks.
It's like one of those, it has like the beads in it. You're trying to move them around. Like they have at holidays and stuff. I hate those things.
And they all like it crushes Luis's body, so like for a while he's just a head, which I did like that. That was
the
also
arthritis part was funny.
Yeah, he's like, I don't have arthritis anymore. I feel great.
And that was smart because it established that there are like stakes, that even though he's dead, he can still be more dead,
Yeah.
And so he gets through, and then there's this giant warrior that's gonna judge him, like prepare to be judged. And he's confident. He's like, I'm doing this for Maria. I love her. And so the sword goes on him and it breaks. And it's like, oh, you're pure of heart. You can enter. So he enters and we meet the candlemaker. Ice Cube. I don't think he's funny. And I don't think he adds much to the story.
He's really inconsequential. Like, he explains to us like, oh, here are all the like the lives, all the candles that are lit. He's like, here's Book of Life. It's animated. It kind of like does its own thing. He explains the Book of Life as like everyone's story is already written down. But Manolo died too soon, and now he gets to write his own story. It's blank. So this is where my big predicament for this movie starts, is that this movie is about predestination versus free will, and that all these other characters in the living world, they're just living out whatever's on these pages. They don't have any choice, but Manolo does.
I thought that the candlemaker says something along the lines of like, you didn't you didn't live the life that you were supposed to live. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so basically he gets to like reset, like he gets to do whatever he wants, but everyone else, it's not like that. So it's really, it's complex.
Yeah, that free will layer. I still remember drunk St. Patrick's Day when someone was trying to have a discussion about like free will and God's omnipotence, and I was like, a bunch of people in the Middle Ages spent years doing this, so I don't have to. Like, while I'm drunk on St. Patrick's Day, like, I don't have to do this. Yeah, so then the Candlemaker takes them to the Land of the Forgotten. They see La Morte. They're like, the Baba cheated. And she's like,
she's
no,
so surprised.
Yeah. What?
And I do love though, like the Baba comes there and she's yelling at him, and Carmen is just like, can you lift me up? And she like lifts him up and she just slaps Zabulba. And then she's like, thank you. And so they make a wager that if Manolo faces his like greatest fear, he and wins, he can go back to Earth, like to the land of the living, and the wager will be done fairly. If not, he will be officially just forgotten, mind wipe.
Yeah, like the newest Spider-Man movie. I've forgotten what it's called.
Oh yeah.
But so the stakes are literally not just that, like, oh, he stays in the land of remember, like he gets poofed into oblivion,
and then the town gets destroyed and his whole family gets poofed into oblivion.
Then, and while this is happening, then isn't like the Cheka like trying to attack the town?
Yeah,
so it's like the two conflicts.
Yeah, so he attacks his the dad dies because the dad fights off the bandits.
Yeah, the dad just shows up.
Yeah, the dad just appears during like the conflict. The grandma does, and then it was Maria and Joaquin were getting married, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Chakal is here," and she's like, "Okay," and he's like, "Oh no, my medal's on my other suit," and he runs off. So that he only wears one outfit. I always thought that like animated characters just kind of wear that one outfit, but like we mentally kind of know that of course like they wash and change clothes. Maybe they just really like Aladdin really likes that blue, purple vest, but like no, like
it's classic.
It's only
a crop. Like crops are in.
I actually
in the 90s.
This is kind of off topic, but I was watching another Netflix show and it's animated and they like change clothes, and I was so surprised that they changed clothes in this show.
That is so funny.
It's crazy when they do that.
It like throws you off.
Yeah, that's why like Princess Tiana I think has the most outfits of any Disney princess, because like any scene where she would make sense for her to be in a different outfit, like she is, you know.
Yeah.
But she does spend a lot of time as a frog, so
yeah. There was also an episode, I think it was the show Doug. I don't know if you all watched that when you were kids, but there's like they show his closet, and in his closet he has the exact same outfit he has on, like
multiples of it.
Yeah. Charlie Brown does that. Star vs. the Force of Evil I think makes that joke where the character is like, I liked red and I liked hoodies, so I bought all of them because he's always in a red hoodie. Okay, so yeah, so Joaquin runs off, so Maria like rallies the town, and then Joaquin eventually shows up and she's like, how dare you, like where were you? Like
it's like I had to get my medal.
And so meanwhile in this giant arena, Manolo has to fight every bull that his family's ever fought. Like they're back for revenge. And then they all coalesce into one giant bull. Mm-hmm. And then he sings the apology song about how like, I'm sorry, like you were never meant, like it's unjust what we've done to you all these years, you know, like I'm sorry, which is big because Sanchez men don't apologize. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he sings a whole apology, and it like dissipates the bull. It's like finds peace, and so then his family's all super happy, and they're like, you know, like we're proud of you, like good for you, you know. And it's like they're like his greatest fear wasn't like being a bullfighter. It was like accepting himself as he was, like being himself.
Yeah. And so that's where my issue with the device, the framing device, is that you need that framing device for us to know what the theme of the movie is. Like they have to tell you, because I don't think it's established enough that like that's what we come away with. So I don't know.
So then he comes back, he bursts out, and Chakal is there, and him and all the bandits are after Joaquin's medal. And well, so then Maria rips it off and she's like, this is all about a stupid medal. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, she's like, you're a fraud. And then everyone's fighting and they're like throwing around the medals. And because it's the Day of the Dead, the Sanchez family is allowed to come back and fight.
Well, isn't that where they find out, like, she's like, oh, it's just about a medal. And he's like, oh, it's not just any medal. Like, Chakal's like, that is the medal of like, everlasting life. Mm-hmm. And then everyone's like, what the fuck?
So there's this big fight. Oh, before the big fight, Manolo kisses Maria. He like does the like swoops her up and kisses her, and he like puts his finger up, like talk to the hand, Chakal.
And he waits patiently. I mean, you got to give him that.
And then they're all fighting. He at one point he kidnaps Maria and is like taking her up the tower, and then
where there's a
bell, and then Manolo comes to rescue her, and they're like dance fighting because she also trained in kung fu.
Her pig gets in on the action.
Everyone's, they're tossing the medal around, they're fighting, and they are winning. And so Chakal's upset, so he's gonna blow them all up. He has bombs attached to him. He lights them all, and so
it's wild.
Manolo like ties him up to the bell. And they're gonna blow up in the bell, and Joaquin is like running up and then gets pushed back, and then there's the huge.
What is the point of him blowing up though? Like then he won't get the medal, and then he won't get victory. Like his little like minions are gonna have to take over, and they don't seem very competent. What's his goal?
Is Chakal an actual person?
I think we need to.
No, just like in the movie, because like I don't know. Some of
like a human.
Yeah.
I think he's just a bandit guy. Chakal.
I'm trying to find photos of him.
El Chakal is a musical artist.
There was a Spanish show where they would do like karaoke kind of. And if you sounded really bad, someone in costume of a chacal would come out with a trumpet and they would play the trumpet, which basically meant you sucked. And then everyone would yell fuera, which would mean like get out. So that's like what I know.
You're hearing this and you're like, what is going on?
Oh yeah, chacal means jackal.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess he's the bad guy, one of the bad guys. So that makes sense.
So he blows up in the bell, and Maria's upset. She thinks Manolo died. Everyone's upset. She's crying. Then it turns out he's alive because Joaquin stuck the medal on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Joaquin gives the medal back to Zabalba, and it's like he learned that he wanted to be like a real hero, without superpowers. Take that, Superman. And then Maria and Manolo are married. They sing "No Matter Where You Are." The kids are happy, and we learn that love is the greatest power of all. And I wrote, also known as Cullen's religion, love is the great. I'm a big True Love Conquers All fan. It's a hot take. Love. I do love it. So yeah, that's the plot. That was not an easy one to summarize quickly.
No. There's a lot going on. So many layers. I mean, where do we want to start? Do you just want to start with like what it looks like?
Do you want to go to vibes? Do you want to go to aesthetic?
Yeah, I was thinking. So I have like the vibes, so like the world and characters and stuff. I liked the world design. I thought it was really interesting.
It's definitely the style of Jorge Gutierrez. Like that's really his overall style is very much kind of dark, but also very colorful. Mm-hmm. Which I think you really see that.
Yeah, and there's a couple different styles happening. Like there's the framing device style, And then within like the actual story, they're sort of like wooden figures, and that's sort of the aesthetic there.
But his Netflix show My and the Three has a similar aesthetic.
Yeah.
This kind of, someone described it as, like the characters are very ornate, but the faces, at least the main characters, are very simple. So you're very focused on the face.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought the world design also for like the Land of the Remembered was really interesting too. Like kind of going back to like talking about Coco a little bit, is that like when I saw Coco in theaters and you see that opening of like being in the land of the dead is so beautiful. I thought this was equally as awesome. Like it's really cool.
I also almost look at it as like this thing of like, so many people fear death. It's gonna get really morbid in here. But so many people fear death, but then in these like Coco, for example, or the Book of Life, they make the afterlife look like such a beautiful place.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. And I also liked how the characters, how they kind of change, like their eyes change once they're in the land of the remembered.
Yeah.
I thought that was like a cool touch of just understanding that they're no longer in the land of the living. And then just like the whole inspiration of the sugar skulls, I thought was really, really cool too.
Yeah. I like the character design when it comes to that world. But in the story world, I don't like Maria's eyes. I don't like the men's noses. They're too phallic for me. Can't get into that. I'm also thinking that maybe this movie was released in 3D because in the framing device world, when we meet the security guard, who, spoiler alert, turns out to be Zabalba, his like nose waggles in front of like the camera like angle, and I'm like, was this 3D? Because that would be terrifying in 3D.
Or even that wall.
Yeah, the wall was
that would
really
have been
cool.
That would have been if it was in 3D, that would have been really cool.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, everything was in 3D back then.
Yeah.
It's true. I never watched 3D films because they always give me headaches. But
me too.
Do you remember The Hobbit was filmed at like a slightly faster frame rate? And I remember within like the first few minutes, I was like, oh my God, my eyes.
They had like warnings that like this may give you like a migraine or make you want to throw up.
I'm like, why do it then?
I actually, this is another kind of off topic, but I went to see the movie Cloverfield in theaters.
Oh, wow.
And the girl in front of me literally threw up. Have you all seen that movie?
Yes.
Yeah. Because of, I guess, the camera shaking.
Found footage is not for everyone. I love it, but I totally get that like motion sickness, it gets at people.
Yeah.
I really think that like the wooden figure style is really kind of interesting. Again, like the clown version of like the Sanchez member looking like Pietro. I literally couldn't stop looking at him anytime he was in a scene. La Muerte though is very cool. Like I really like her design. What do you guys think of Zabalba's design?
There's a lot going on with his design.
Yeah.
His pupils are red skulls.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
He reminds me a bit of like Hades in Hercules.
Oh, he did personality wise, he's a lot. I think visually very different, but personality wise a lot. Yeah, well, I guess they still have the dark robes and like the hunch.
I think maybe it's like just like the bright color against the black. It's like he's bright green, Hades is like that bluish color. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really love his design. It kind of, for me, it felt a little out of place actually. But I thought La Muertes was really good.
Yeah. Whoever did the character design on La Muerte did a really good job, because I even thought like the hat is very like Mexican inspired, and then the candles that surround like her hat, or even like her
dress.
Yeah, I thought that
cool.
was really cool. And there, I think she also has like flowers, and then her like belt going down, I think it's the marigolds. So I think there's just so much detail in her overall character design.
Yeah, I think I do in general, actually, I think the visual nature of the film, and like I like how it's not just like your typical like kind of Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar look. Like it's very unique look and world, and the lore is laid out pretty clearly. I think the world and the aesthetics of the world is some of the strongest aspects of the movie. I think when we're talking about overall vibe, I think its weakness comes in the jukebox numbers. I think like the original numbers are really strong, but the jukebox numbers, like I almost feel like this movie was too good for it. Like the design, the visuals were so unique. I would have loved to see music that went along with it.
I
Yeah.
agree. I feel like, yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me, like why they wouldn't take advantage of that, because it's I feel like it's an easy choice. I don't know. But yeah,
The jukebox musical stuff feels like something that was there in like an early pitch to try and make it more marketable and sellable to like majorly white studio heads.
Right.
And it's just, it feels like a remnant of that. Like the movie, they like believed in the project and gave it stuff, and it could have left that behind and just been a full-on musical.
Would you like La Muerte to be ruined for you?
No, okay, what?
Someone drew like a waifu photo of her, and I'm like,
No.
God damn it. Why are you people like this?
Oh God, what is this?
Yeah, they completely ruined her. So there's that.
I'm on my work computer. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh God, delete your history.
Oh
now.
gosh, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I almost wonder, like, if this film was released today, I think that they would have had the freedom or flexibility to make their own music that was more, I think, in tune with like the culture.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think, but that this was only made 8 years, I guess longer than that, thinking about how long it takes to make these films.
Yeah. Okay, so so it's kind of the vibes. We want to talk about the characters, specifically like if we like them. We always ask, who is the protagonist, who is the strongest desire? Shout out to Scott Thompson. I mean, Manolo is very clearly our protagonist. Like he's the one we're following through. You know, I mean, I think we get a bit from Maria's perspective, more so than Joaquin's. We don't see much from his.
Yeah. So I mean, if Manolo has the strongest desire, his desire is to be with Maria, right?
And
like that's his strongest desire.
Yeah, that, and to be himself, to play music.
But his strongest desire is to
be with Maria. Yes.
And so then the story's theme should be around that strongest desire, but it's not.
Here's the thing is I feel like, you know, they reached we'll get here. Okay. I don't know if we should. So we reached the end, right? And Christina Applegate is like, love is everything. You know, love is the greatest force, you know? And that is kind of what the story is building to, in that like Maria and Manolo overcome all these crazy obstacles to be together. And they've always kind of wanted to be together since they were kids, and they are able to reach that, you know? But I think I've talked about this a bit on our TikTok, like because of like Disney princess discourse and this kind of thing that like love isn't like a good goal for characters. They like didn't want to make that be the message. So they wanted to be like, oh, be yourself, you know, which you can still have as a secondary message. But I mean, love is what's motivating this character.
Yeah, so that's like my big issue with like all the different layers and stuff, is that it feels confused about what it really wants to say, which is unfortunate, because like Brothers Grimm, like I think it has a lot of really great foundation. Like that lore, like completely brand new, made of a bunch of really cool stuff, is awesome. But then I also look like who produced it, Guillermo del Toro. Well, he doesn't really do simple things, so I'm like, am I surprised? He does complex. So, but yeah, I mean, that's just kind of something I think that prevented me from really liking this movie, is that I was very confused about what I was supposed to take away.
Do you root for Manolo?
Of course. I mean, okay, for the most part I do, but then he's just like becomes annoying, because he's like, I don't know, I feel like his I think it was the Creep song that did it for me, that was like hard pass. Because I think that was actually the point where I was like, oh no, actually he's annoying, because I'm like, oh, like the sensitive type. But also maybe because he was acting a lot like Joaquin in like pursuing her, like she wanted to be wooed and he just kind of expected that he was going to get a kiss, just like kind of Joaquin is expecting that she's going to marry him because, you know, these stakes that she has. So, but again, I think that goes to like the being yourself. Like I kind of talked about it with you earlier, that like, to me, what I get from Manolo and Maria's love story is, to be loved, you have to be yourself. Like she was pushing him to be himself. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah. But I mean, I root for him. Don't want root for Joaquin.
Yeah. What about you, Krizabeth?
I mean, I definitely rooted for Manolo as well. But I also was like, I don't know, I found his lack of being himself kind of unattractive to me. And I feel like Maria is such a strong character. Like she knows who she is. She knows what she wants. And then you have Manolo, who's like kind of lame in the sense that he's like doesn't want to accept who he is.
Yeah.
Right.
So I was kind of like, screw both of them, girl. Like, just be single. Like,
well, I mean, if I'm totally honest, like this whole Maria thing, like she goes off to Spain. Presumably, I'm thinking to it like an all-girls school. I was like, she's a lesbian now. Like they don't have a chance. That's why, like, I was kind of like joking about it in my head, but I was also kind of serious. I'm like, listen, like she comes back and they're like all over her. I'm like, listen, no. Where's her lesbian lover that she wants to be with?
Or the real plot twist where she ends up with one of the mariachi members.
Yeah, something like that. That would be great.
Yeah, I think, but you know, a protagonist is supposed to kind of have some kind of deficiency, right?
Yeah.
That kind of they need to overcome. And I think that's why Manolo is better as protagonist than, say, Maria, because Maria knows what she wants. She's self-assured. She's comfortable in herself. The pressure in her life is coming from outside.
Yeah.
She's not really, I mean, she is internalizing like it's her responsibility to like use her body as currency to protect the town. That is a lot to put on this like 20-year-old.
Yeah. The other thing 16. For me,
maybe 16. Maybe like 16, I'm like, she could be 16 to 25 somewhere in there.
The other thing for me is that I didn't really see myself in Manolo, and I don't know why that is. I just feel like I didn't really care about him until he was in the land of the dead, and like his family was also at stake, and like the town was at stake.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I think that's kind of where I connected with him in a way, was like that pressure from like a parent or like a family member to be something or pursue something that you don't really want. That was a story that I think I could relate to, but then I think he lost me with like, you know, wanting Maria so badly. I was
like, okay. And I think that's what it is that like that took precedent over him being himself in the story.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the story segments the different plot or conflicts.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, that's right. He like really cared about being a musician and didn't want to be a bullfighter. That's right. He's not just pursuing Maria. So I think maybe that's also another thing, like the structure prevented me from really getting to connect with him consistently, I guess.
Yeah, and I keep getting all of these, like it's funny because it's like we're supposed to be comparing this movie to Coco later, but I keep thinking of Aladdin with this movie.
Interesting, yeah.
He has a similar, like Aladdin's thing is like learning to be himself and also pursuing Jasmine. And that movie kind of weaves them. And I think this movie is, you know, equally good at weaving those two things together. I think because love can be physically seen, right? Because like people are kissing, you know, like I think it's easier to visually resolve that than accepting yourself.
Right.
So I think both movies kind of have a similar struggle in that regard. I connected with him, I think, you know, because he's dealing with like he doesn't fit their standards of masculinity, even though he is like actually very physically skilled and strong.
Yeah.
And it shows just how
he
rigid.
Can bullfight. He just doesn't want to kill them. Yeah. It's like, why is that the problem? You have more bulls, you just keep the entertainment going. Come on.
Yeah, it shows just how rigid those standards can be, that even someone like him can't meet them.
Yeah, he's a specimen, like, let's be clear.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of talking about our protagonist. I do think his parents, when it comes to his parents, his dad is very Disney dad, very King Triton, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the mom, I don't know, for whatever reason, she just like won me over instantly.
Yeah.
She felt like a mom. I don't
Yeah.
know, like that feeling of like, oh, safety, and like that's how
Yeah.
I felt
Yeah.
about her.
So if we talk about the antagonist, I mean, Joaquin is kind of an antagonist.
Yeah.
He's kind of a jerk, you know, he's very
Manolo
self-centered.
comes up against a lot of antagonists.
Because we have
in this
Chakal, who like I just I didn't even think about that much when we were
No.
planning for this.
And that's why I'm like, what is the point of having this in here?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let's
They
take
needed
that
the-
one out.
They needed the external threat to the town, I guess.
Yeah.
There's so many other ways to like to have this. I mean, well, why? Like, what? I mean, why can't we just have another conflict with just Manolo that like bringing the candlemaker in? It's like, well, you have to like regain your pages or something. Like, you have
Yeah.
to like be confident to live your life, because that's what Christina Applegate / La Muerte says, is that like they're gonna have the courage to live life. Like,
Yeah.
that's also like another theme that's not fully explored. And I feel like if it's like, well, you can go back and be with her, because like, what if they like kind of like looking at a diary, they looked at her pages and like, you guys get married. You guys are supposed to get married.
Yeah, like what if she marries Joaquin?
You can go back, but you have to have the courage to live.
To live, yeah. Boom.
You're welcome. I am a dramaturg. I can help with any script. But I think that would really help solidify our character more, like in that whole connecting the love and having courage to live life. And maybe I wouldn't be so focused on the predestination versus free will thing.
Well, because what if like, hey, there's two options, like she marries Manolo or she marries Joaquin. I mean, there should be the third. She doesn't marry
yeah, it's
them,
like,
but like
she marries her lesbian lover from Spain.
Yeah, but like if she married, like what if it's like if she and Joaquin get married, they're both gonna be miserable. And they're gonna have kids, and those kids are gonna be miserable.
Or
like,
if they don't even know what could happen if she marries Joaquin, if he just knows, you guys have, there's two paths. She marries, three paths. She marries Joaquin, she marries her lesbian lover from Spain, or she marries you and you have a great life together. You have the potential to have a great life together.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be totally enough. And I think that ties all of the stuff that this movie wants to have together. Now I'm really excited. I gotta hook me up with this person. I'm gonna talk to him like, let's do Book of Life 2. Come on.
I actually thought, just from the very beginning, I obviously didn't factor in that Chakala would even existed, or that he would come into the story.
Never have predicted it.
I thought what would happen was that with Joaquin having the medal, that would like somehow turn him into like an evil force or something that they had to go against.
I mean, it glows bright green.
Yeah.
So.
Or that there was some kind of consequence with having eternal power.
Yeah. That's another excellent addition that, again, just tie it all in, that like, I don't know.
I think a lot of a lot of animated movies, and I think this is specifically coming from a lot of trends that were established in the Disney Renaissance, like the 90s Disney, is they often want like Pixar doesn't fall into this. And I usually complain a lot about Pixar, but they don't. But a lot of, they need to have world-ending stakes, right? You know, when you think of like old ones, like Snow White, like the first one, right? Like the stakes are only about her. They're not about the kingdom, even though there's an evil queen running it. Maybe she's just really good at finance. Like, who knows? That kingdom is thriving. But like, it's like Snow White's life sucks, right? Like, her life is in danger, And I think as things went on, and you get to like the Little Mermaid and Aladdin and stuff, right? Like you have Ursula and Jafar trying to take over, or like Hades and Hercules. So I think it's like the external threat, and not just being like based in one character's happiness, has become so standard in these in the fantasy genre, especially marketed towards children, but just fantasy in general, because you think of like the Wizard of Oz, like the Wicked Witch isn't trying to take over or anything. Like she's only a problem because she hates Dorothy. Like it's all about Dorothy's journey. Yeah. Compared to like, I don't know, Aragon, where he's got to keep holding onto that dragon, and they have to like save the kingdom, whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure there's probably some parallel with culture shifting with like the Gulf War and stuff like that. I'm sure that's going to have something to do with it. That's like the USA in the making.
I definitely want to talk about the war on terror when we're talking about Lord of the Rings, but
yeah. So I mean, that's interesting because I'm talking about like, why don't we just boil it down to like his stakes, his personal life? I feel like I would care enough about that, as an audience member. But yeah, making it about like the world could be ending around him. Is
his whole family is forgotten.
Do you think it's possible though? Because I think this is still kind of like a kid's movie, right? So it's like, could we? I don't know. I don't know that children would understand.
Well, I mean, like
break it down
Dumbo,
that
right? Like Dumbo, the stakes are entirely based in Dumbo and his life. And he's cute, so we care. You know, like I think, you know, like again.
If we talk about Coco, it's all about Miguel. But maybe we buy into that more, like if we were children, is because Miguel is also a child. So like that's his whole world. So maybe Manolo, we need to know how old he is so we know if we should care.
No, I mean, but I think it's like, I think your phrasing though is right. Like it's his whole world. So it has to be his whole world. So like Cinderella takes place like in her house, essentially, like almost the whole movie, except for when she leaves to go to the ball. But like that's her whole world, and the stakes are high for her. The kingdom, it doesn't like whatever, like that kingdom is ruled by an insane person. If she doesn't get married
to the prince, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, like, but for her, like her life is what's, you know, at stake in that story.
And the key to like buying into like caring about that character's whole world is really like, do we fully connect with this person consistently over the story? And I think with the Chakal stuff, and there's a lot of segmentation, I think that prevents that. So
there's a lot of antagonistic forces. Zababa is very Hades, which I wrote in my note. He reminds me a lot of Hades. So the romance, I buy them as a couple. Especially by animated movie standards. Like
love triangle, I don't understand why Zabalba, like he knew he had to cheat because Lucky was a little shit.
And then the message, we've talked a lot about it, but that's kind of my final point, is it's kind of like love conquers all. I do feel like this afterlife is a little dystopian because eventually people will forget you, like just how time happens. But I'm like, but you know, heaven, hell, that dichotomy. Sorry, I'm gonna get canceled by Pope Francis again. Also a little dystopian because like people are suffering for like more time than a human can fathom.
And then also, so where this again becomes the predestination thing is the very last line said in this film by Ice Cube, aka Candlemaker. He says, "Write your own story." Now I have an issue. I take umbrage with that. Maria can't write her own story. It's already in the book of life. She can't do it. So only Manolo gets to do it. And because he died and came back, do we all have to take that risk? I can't take that risk.
Well,
so
maybe Manolo is Jesus because him dying changed all the stories, right? Because everything's interconnected, the butterfly effect. So that's why
he die for our sins.
that's why we have free will now.
So that's why I'm like, what is this? Like, that's what this is. Like getting rid of the predestination things in like the actual book of life where like everyone who goes to heaven, like your name is there. My name, I was told to be there because I was baptized properly. Well, actually, you know what? I take that back. I got baptized in a chlorine pool in our pastor's backyard. So you know what? Maybe not. Pope Francis, come for me. I was a Methodist anyway.
What do you feel about the message, Krizabeth?
The overall message, I mean, I think it's important. And I think it's, I don't know, I always think of like, I kind of have a weird view on it because I think while you can write your own story, sometimes I do wonder like what is predestined and what is not. How does fate and like us seeking opportunity come together? So that's kind of what I always think about. But I think the overall message is important. Like you should be yourself. And I think the love triangle kind of overtakes the actual message sometimes in film. And I think I feel like Jorge Gutierrez, not because I don't know him, but I feel like he pitched the idea of like, let's do this story and then have all of these different undertones of like Dia de los Muertos, and we have this love triangle, and then there's a chacal. So I just think it was a lot in one movie. That's what I think.
Yeah. And I think the love triangle is very marketable. You can put that in an ad
Yeah.
easily. That was the golden age of love
Twilight
triangles so
Hunger Games.
yeah. And I think it's an effective trope, especially because so many love triangles aren't actually love triangles. Like this is a faux love triangle. Like we know who Maria wants to be with the whole time.
Yeah.
Like she's not deciding.
She's just being nice to Joaquin.
Yeah. So I think that's because in that way you could argue like Beauty and the Beast is a love triangle because like Gaston wants to be with Belle, but like Belle has no interest. Like, so
for a second I thought you were gonna say like her, the Beast and the Candlestick or something. I was like, what? I forgot about Gaston.
Yeah. So it's I think the love triangle overtakes it, but I like the message of like, they were referring to love in all these different facets, like the love he has with his family and the fact that love can bridge the gap between life and death. And I think that kind of belief in like love as that powerful of a force, it's simplistic, but I think it's found in a lot of these kinds of stories. It's a big element of fantasy. And a lot of fantasy could be boiled down to that message. So I was like, I'm here for it, And I think being yourself, and I think especially like, this is where I want to connect this with Coco. So I think I like Coco. I think I like this one more. I think that's
this one had really good comedic timing in certain parts, and I think that's what I enjoyed the most of this film.
I think I liked like this kind of big epic like love story, like the mythological elements. And I think Pixar makes great movies, but I think a lot of Pixar movies are kind of about holding on to childhood, which always contrasts with Disney to me, which is weird because like we have these Disney adults, right? And they're like very attached to childhood. But like most Disney movies are about growing up and leaving childhood behind. Like Ariel's like by ocean, like, and like if Pixar made that movie, it'd be like, oh my gosh, I remember being in the ocean. It was so lovely with my mom. Like it could be, like there's, and so I think Coco, it's not the most of the Pixar movies when it in this regard, but it is kind of about coming back to that family unit, which isn't a bad thing. That's, I think we needed both kinds of stories. But I also think, so like Disney markets these two films heavily in that they want Latino people's money, but like Encanto and Coco, and both of them feature protagonists who are kind of stifled by a parental figure, not their parents, but it's always an abuela. It's always a woman who's crushing their dreams. And I think it's a very telling Disney decision because they don't want to step anywhere near the machismo conversation. And I think this movie does. It's not like it's about that. It's not like it's only talking about that. But like the fact that, we don't apologize and we kill the bull. And he's like, I apologize and I don't kill the bull. And eventually his family accepts that. And he is his own person. And he's still like this handsome hero, hero guy, that gets the girl, but he is still kind of challenging those toxic masculinity tropes. And I think Disney is so afraid of starting that conversation because they're under that microscope, that they always make the oppressive parental figure a woman in these films.
I also feel like at times, and I'm trying to think back, but I had this conversation with someone who has a history in animation actually, and I was asking like, why is it always a Disney story, even Pixar, it always starts with like trauma of like the loss of a parent, and like then that like builds character throughout the film. I always find that to be really interesting because it is always a woman, like a female figure or a woman figure in the family that is creating all this trauma, or they don't have, or there's something missing, and then that's
Yeah.
how character is built. It's weird and interesting at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of like stories, especially fairy tales, like if the mom was alive, like they wouldn't happen. You know, like I mean, that's basically, I mean, the whole premise
Yeah,
of Cinderella, like if
Cinderella.
her mom was
Yeah.
around, you know, if I mean, in Little Mermaid, I mean, there's a grandmother in the original story, but in the Disney movie, like if Ariel had a mom around, the mom would be like, Triton, like calm down, like
Yeah. But I think for me, the thing that obviously the connection with Dia de los Muertos that is in with Coco and this movie, but Coco is about Dia de los Muertos, but this movie isn't really about it. It just happens to, like, the overworld takes place at this time, and I guess does Manolo go there on Dia de los Muertos,
yeah,
right? So it happens on this day,
yeah,
but so that's, I think, one reason why I don't think it's super fair to completely, compare them, is because they just happen to both be about this topic and this culture. Again, I cannot stress enough that the fact that the antagonist died by a bell, I mean, I'm not saying that Coco plagiarized, but I might be saying that Coco plagiarized, because that, I lost my mind. Also, I think like the musician thing, and like obviously Miguel's family, they were shoemakers, and it's some sort of long family tradition. It's a sort of other thread. But I think for me, what drives me to Coco as opposed to this, I think, is the structure. But also, like, I think like the magic of being in that world. We're sort of with Miguel, he's experiencing it for the first time. He's scared, and then he's kind of like into it. So there's that sort of emotional journey. Manolo's super into it when he gets there, which is kind of interesting. But they're very different movies, like especially after this conversation.
Yeah.
Like, it's important to, they're very different movies. And I think I had a lot of comparisons when I was watching it, but they're about different things. I don't know where I'm going with this anymore, but basically, I originally thought I had so much to say comparing these two movies, but like, especially going over the lore aspect.
I also feel like this is kind of a reminder that while there are a lot of similarities within like the concept of Dia de los Muertos, it's two very different stories. So can you really compare the two?
Right.
Yeah. No, I think it's key that like Coco is very much kind of explaining the holiday to people who aren't from that culture. You know, like it's very much, this is what it is. And there's definitely that in Book of Life, but it's more like it's setting, it's backdrop. And like that's a lot of like It's a Wonderful Life is a famous Christmas movie that doesn't need, it's just set on Christmas. It's not really about Christmas.
Right.
And so this isn't really about the holiday. And it's like, we don't need, to go back to like Cinderella again, but like, that's just a story everyone knows, was easy to reference, but like, we don't need to explain the fairy lore in Cinderella, because it's just a story that has that element in it, it's just like, she doesn't need to be like, and this fairy was present at my baptism that was Pope Francis approved, and she was my godmother, and she's been fucking around and now she's showing up, like it's, it's just kind of part of the lore. And I think when it comes to these non-European stories, we often have to explain the lore, but that's just kind of how it is. That's a whole other conversation, but like
who it's marketed to,
and
stuff like that.
But still, like, it doesn't have to be like, and that's the meaning of the lore. It can just be set dressing to a story you want to tell about like love and finding yourself.
Right. Yeah. And I just wanted to make that distinction because I think like I said it, I think you had also said it like at the top of the episode, like we were going to talk about Coco, and then we just kind of didn't, because I mean, talking about the lore comparing to this story, like they're not super comparable.
No, yeah.
So
that's everything we have in our discussion today. That was the Book of Life. I believe it's so weird because of just the time. I think our next episode is going to be delving into Egyptian lore.
So
and the gods of Egypt.
I can't wait. So yeah, if you are excited to hear our thoughts on the gods of Egypt, which is a quality film, spoiler alert, that's sarcasm. You definitely want to check us out on Instagram and TikTok. We are at Not My Fantasy Pod. And then if you're listening on like Apple Podcasts, like give us a 5-star review, like tell us what you liked, and share it around with friends and family, because we really want to get this out there and we want other people to hear it. So we want to find other awesome listeners. So definitely let people know, give us those ratings. And then if you're watching us on YouTube, which is like a new thing for us, hi.
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button.
Smash it.
Your clickbait can be Cullen was canceled by Pope Francis.
All right, I mean, we might. But yeah, like the video, leave us a comment. That really helps us. Obviously, subscribe to the channel and
hit that bell button to get that notification.
Yeah, because for some reason YouTube made that a separate thing. And again, we cannot stress enough, like, please share this with your friends and family. Like, we want to hear from other people.
Yeah. Well, Krizabeth, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here. I was really nervous. This is my first podcast ever. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not someone who watches films and like dissects them. I watch them just for entertainment, I guess. So I was really nervous, but I think you all opened my eyes to this film. And now I feel like I need to rewatch it, and I need to rewatch Coco. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And you were still very insightful, even if this isn't something you normally do. Like, so it's fun sometimes it is fun just to watch a movie and experience it, but sometimes it's also fun to.
God, I haven't been able to do that in years.
I know, I lost that.
Screenwriting program ruined me.
You know what? I do turn my brain off when I watch the Princess Switch franchise. It's like, how many people are
if your brain is running during those movies, you get some. No, you can't. You just don't want to do that to yourself.
The Morte be with you for that.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. And Krizabeth, thank you for joining. And we will see you next time.
Thank you. Follow your dreams, everyone.
Write your own story.
Write your own story.
Ice Cube.